When it comes to the indie and alternative musical fields, there have been few names that have sparked as much controversy and polarization from an audience standpoint as Melanie Martinez. Ever since her appearance on The Voice way back when, she sort of catapulted into this overnight success in a way where she had a very unique aesthetic that was instantly recognizable and stood out compared to practically every other mainstream indie and art pop and pop artist at the time. While she certainly wasn't the first, nor will she be the last artist to embody a character or some sort of thematic element to storytell and use that as a storytelling device, she certainly put it forward in a way that made her stand out from the crowd and rise above the pile to be someone that people either really enjoyed the presence of or really despised the presence of. And this immediately came about with how she had this connection to the baby aesthetic or the regression aesthetic in many people's eyes. With records like K-12 and like Crybaby embodying this sort of spirit, specifically Crybaby, which had song titles, lyricism, and aesthetics that had that sort of vibe to it. What I'm going to attempt to do in this video is go through Melanie Martinez in more of a deep dive sort of philosophical way, give you my opinions of her as well as some takes as to every little controversy that's happened within her canon, as well as my opinions on her musical style just as a whole. I think there are a lot of pros to Melanie Martinez, and I think that there are a lot of cons as well. I think the most standout pros right off the bat is she's very unique in the way that she approaches her songwriting. I know that she has been called a carbon copy of people like Nicole Dollinger or specifically like Lana Del Rey. She's held in the same camp as that, and while you could kind of compare that sort of Lorde-esque, atmospheric R&B infused art pop music with the very hushed and subdued sort of feminine crooning over the instrumentation, that is something that became a very popular outlet in the 2010s for a lot of popular artists in the pop and indie and alternative fields. So I can understand why people would compare that, but I think the fact that she takes that different aesthetic approach sets her apart from those artists in the same way that I don't think a person like Ethel Cain should be compared to Lana Del Rey, even if they are in a comparable field or in the same vein. I think they're different enough and embody their emotions different enough to make it to where they're not just the same thing. Now, with that being said, in a musical sort of veneer, I think that Melanie oftentimes will play it a little bit safe in the way that she approaches her songwriting. One thing that I've found pretty much across her entire discography is she has a very hyper-sanitized, clean production style that, in my opinion, specifically considering how electronic-based it is, can oftentimes leave it sounding a little bit hollow and lifeless at times, where an instrumental is not necessarily as punchy as it should be, or if it's meant to be more emotive and on the more emotional side, not really having the same sort of atmosphere that is lending itself to its topic matter, where it's losing some of its intensity and some of its depth to just how hyper sanitized and clean the production is, that saps it a bit of its organicness and makes it feel a little bit too synthesized and on the nose and artificial, which, especially considering she tackles a lot of very serious topics in her music, I think I would love to hear Melanie kind of have more of a stripped back approach, because I think when she is more minimalistic, when she is a little bit more scant, I think it does a lot more for making her music feel more multifaceted than it would otherwise. Sonically, even though she will have very vulnerable moments and tackle these important topics, I think she plays it a little bit defensive and safe across a lot of her discography. And me personally, I have enjoyed the deep cuts on her records more than some of like the mainstay popular singles or tracks off of each of her individual albums. I think the commercial viability isn't necessarily a bad thing, but priding herself on this sort of pedestal of being this more dark and macabre sort of artist that isn't afraid to kind of be a little creepy and eerie and play around with that, I think it feels a little artificial and sacrifices some of its grimness for its hyper sanitized production, whereas I think some of the deeper cuts where she takes it in more of an art pop direction, does some things that could be considered experimental, plays around with different instrumentation to embody her emotions, I think it not only does a ton in setting her apart and making her material feel unique, I think it also lets her breathe and shows her strengths as a songwriter, because I think when she does go in these more experimental directions, it sounds better with what she is attempting, especially when you're getting some very creepy lyricism, or when you're getting something that is very deep or very intrinsic to the way that she songwrites. It helps it when it's not sitting sitting amidst these instrumentals that aren't really doing their best job to not play it safe and to sit shoulder to shoulder with these topic matters and tackle them in a very good way. Now, a lot of people have written her off as being cheesy, as being cringy, as being corny, and I think there's sort of been this doggy pile mentality where she got popular to hate, and when someone gets popular to hate, naturally people are just going to want to reiterate that and regurgitate that without really diving into her music and just sit and listen to what's on the surface and take that as gospel as being the embodiment of her entire musical catalog. And with her discography, I think one of the biggest things that she does in a positive way is she shines a light on a lot of issues that, yeah, they may be discussed by other artists in different ways, but she tackles these things in a very poetic way, whether you're talking about LGBT issues, whether you're talking about EDs, abuse, regression, toxic relationships, and many other things. I mean, she tackles them in a way that does feel very this generation. Without a shadow of a doubt, she appeals to a lot of like Gen Zers and millennials, and she has a very modern sort of outlook on a lot of things and a very sort of liberal way of writing her songwriting, and I don't mean that in the political way, I mean that just in the liberal way. They just have this ability of writing music that takes these very important and notable themes and putting them together in a way that is simultaneously pretty vague and relatable to a variety of people who might be struggling with it, but also poetic enough and having enough depth to be dissectable, to be a little bit philosophical and deeper and really beautifully woven together. And there's a lot of care put into every single lyrical component. And even if a lot of Melanie's music just isn't my cup of tea from a production or a vocal department, I really do appreciate the way that she tackles lyricism and storytelling. And when it comes to modern alternative and pop artists, she is hands down one of the most talented and standout songwriters that I have ever heard, that's been able to toe the line between relatable content that people can really relate to and resonate with and get something out of that can help them in many ways, but also writing things in a storytelling fashion that is harmonious and as something that is gorgeously put together. Not counting EPs like Pity Party or After School, I'd say that my ranking of Melanie's discography would probably go K12, Crybaby, Portals. I'm not the biggest fan of the direction that she's taken her music in on Portals, and there are some really big standouts on that record that I do enjoy. I like Death, I like The Contortionist, I like Battle of the Larynx, but with that being said, I think it came across embodying some of the worst traits of her past material and came together in a really disjointed and incohesive way. Listening to the album from start to finish just feels like it's very scatterbrained and all over the place, whereas K12 and Crybaby really did feel like a full story playing out from start to finish. Portals feels like a lot of separate ideas trying to work in tandem with each other like a jigsaw puzzle and finding pieces that just don't fit in with each other properly. I think a lot of the transitions are a lot more abrupt than she has embodied on her past material, and whereas K12 and Crybaby took the storytelling aspect in a way that even if you listen to it in single format, just individually as tracks, they could function as solo listening experiences. If you listen to them in their entirety, you could feel that story play out. Portals, I think, fails on both fronts in some regard, where I think that if you try to listen to it all together, like I said, I think it's a little scatterbrained, a little all over the place, and obviously that can be a subjective thing, but I also think individually there are a lot of cluttered tracks that are scattered about that you need the full album to really get the full enjoyment out of, and that sort of sudden, abrupt change up, as well as the just transitional periods feeling a little wonky. I think it doesn't have the same spirit as her past material, and I understand that the reason for that is it's like the killing of her past self, and it's this magical rebirth, and I think a lot of the erraticness and manicness of the transitions is embodying sort of that rage, that anger, that sense of peace and content and resentment of the past moving into the future and having this more eerie and macabre thing. Because even though Portals, I think, is the most overproduced of her three records, I think comparatively speaking with K12 and Crybaby, those two records records played it a little safe and by the numbers instrumentally from what you would expect from the alternative pop and art pop sort of veneer. But when it came to Portal, she did take a lot of risks. She did take these experimental ventures into some places that you don't usually hear. And I can understand the complaints with a lot of people saying it's a little campy or theatrical, a little overzealous, and playing out the melodrama. And at the end of the day, that's just kind of going to be up to your discretion whether you enjoy that or not. I personally like to hear emotion put into music in that way, but I can understand why someone wouldn't really get that much out of it. And this goes without saying, but just to sort of cap off this section of the video, I have to say she is fantastic at constructing music videos, at constructing set pieces, the way that she designs everything from her concert sets to the way she does these little mini films and her music videos. They are beautiful, they are stunning, they are wonderfully put together. The lighting, the design of everything, the way it works in characteristically with the thematic elements, I think it really is cool what she is able to do with a visual format as well as her musical format. And once again, the olive branch that she extends to numerous communities for representation and putting them in front of millions upon millions of people platforms something that a lot of people could get so much out of and could literally save lives in terms of providing that platform and making people feel more secure within themselves, seeing people that look like them, that identify as they do on the screen. But there has been a lot of controversy with Melanie. There has been multiple things that have happened throughout the years that have caught a lot of shit. The biggest of which being around the 2017 era, Timothy Heller, a woman that Melanie knew, accusing her and forming allegations of her assaulting her, of her raping her. And this was a false statement that a lot of people took out of context. There was not the concrete proof that should be made with an allegation like this, and it shows in many ways how a lot of times celebrities, whether it be a singer, an actor, an actress, whatever it may be, are targeted by someone that is wanting to shoot at them in some form or fashion to try to take a shot at jealousy, at envy for what they have, and having some sort of strain or tension behind the scenes that we'll obviously never know because that's done and dusted at this point. But it really fractured a lot of people's opinions on Melanie. It caused a lot of her own fans to boycott her, and it caused a lot of people to be turned off of her forever because people will run when they see a headline. And the Timothy Heller situation pretty much turned out to be a false alarm that wasn't even true, but that still stained Melanie's reputation to this day, where people will still run around saying in a misinformed light that it did happen, that it existed, that Melanie's a predator, whatever. And she wrote the amazing song Piggyback that was in response to all of it, and it was in this really petty way that felt awesome. And the fact that this came out at that time, a lot of people weren't a big fan of that, because this was also around the time that people were really weird about Melanie's aesthetic and that type of thing. And for the people that already didn't like Melanie, this gave them an even bigger reason to not like Melanie. Because when you already don't like someone and you already have this vendetta against someone and you already have this bias against them, of course you're going to want that. You want to see them fall. You want to see them get splintered and damaged. And that's exactly what happened in this situation. And it's one of the reasons that I understand there's sort of, in this generation, the whole thing of like, always believe the victim. But there's such a thing as looking at a situation, putting two and two together, seeing that there isn't proof, seeing that there is a noticeable red flag or multiple red flags going off, and there's such a thing as reliability, there is such a thing as validity, and I think a lot of people take shit out of context. And for an artist that was as polarizing and controversial in the alternative pop way as Melanie was, it was easy for people to just take that and run to the hills and claim that she was a predator, that she was assaulting people and that type of shit. And it's just is what it is. And then there's the whole shit about the relationship that she had with Oliver Tree. And this is a whole can of worms that is difficult to dissect because a lot of people have some very big opinions of it. And this is something that I've not only looked into a lot, but I've watched a lot of stuff about and followed very closely, because for quite a while I did like Oliver Tree as an artist, and I did respect Melanie as an artist and listened to both of them. And I felt like something was a little fishy about it, and it later pretty much turned out it was. Oliver Tree has gone on the record saying that no song on Portals is about him, and that the two have talked about that in the same way that people have thought that Oliver Tree has written material about Melanie Martinez. And obviously, he has said before he takes dark aspects of his life and puts it into his art form. But once again, he has said that it hasn't been about Melanie and that the two weren't on bad terms. Both in interviews have went on the record saying that the fan bases took so much out of context and absolutely tanked both of them. So far as Oliver Tree saying that it affected his mental health very deeply, the way he was being attacked, the way he was being doggypiled on. And for Melanie, her fan base was very rabid. Same with Oliver Tree's. They appealed to two very different demographics, and I think the biggest reason it clashed and got lost in translation with all this misinformation and cloudiness and haze is because they appeal to two completely separate demographics that are astronomically different and also diametrically opposed to one another. They're literally a yin and yang, and not in a positive way. Melanie appeals to a lot of Gen Z and millennial people that are femme or LGBT in some way or non-conforming in some way. A lot of people with deep traumatic sort of shit and mental health issues. People that are generally speaking more liberal, more progressive. Whereas Oliver Tree's fan base is pretty much the exact opposite of it, with a lot of like right or far right type of people adopting his sort of shtick and seeing him as this counterculture icon in the same Gen Z and millennial way, but more often than not appealing to men and young men and that sort of thing. And you'll see that sort of zany, awkward, offensive, slur-using, edgy sort of person conflicting with Melanie's fan base being the exact opposite. And when they butt heads, they kind of just turned rabid, because Oliver Tree's fan base tend to be more trollish and they want to push buttons, they want to get on people's nerves. Melanie's fan base is very dedicated, very diehard. She has some of the most dedicated and motivated fans to supporting her and her messaging and what she does in the entire musical industry when it comes to pop listeners. And so when these two are butting heads without even listening to what the actual artists are saying on it, neither people ever said to go after each other, and on the contrary, both said to just leave the other person the fuck alone. But fan bases will be fan bases, fandoms will be fandoms, and they have some very dedicated fans. Even so, that toxicity was damaging. It was damaging to both of their reputations, to both of their careers and discographies, as well as both of the fan bases where they had these sort of blood vendettas against each other. And it's unfortunate because they really did separate on decent terms, in air quotes, in the grand scheme of things, or at least separated in a better version of themselves than many people gave them credit for or even thought they were. And that transformative period literally got attacked and publicized, put out to the public in so many ways that it shouldn't have been. And people pulled that and extrapolated that and took it in so many different directions than it was ever intended to go into. And it really just showed how bad fandoms can be sometimes. People did not allow these artists to breathe on their own, and so many wild rumors came up about it. Evil was talked about as being part of her last relationship, and so people took that and ran with it as being towards Oliver Tree. Moon Cycle was literally a metaphorical song that was talking about menstrual cycles and having a lover or boyfriend that didn't mind it, and finding the sense of beauty and power within yourself as a result of it. Not to mention, after they broke up, Oliver Tree was asked if he would ever make movies or make art of his sort of feelings on the topic, and he said he didn't want to make movies out of his feelings or make that as his art. And people immediately took this as a jab at K-12, because people were really just grasping at straws to try to find anything that they could that either were doing, and just assuming automatically that anything that they did that was in any sort of negative, vague way was automatically about the other person. And I think that was just a very toxic way to look at the whole situation, and it shouldn't have taken them publicizing their breakup and where they were, the terms they were on, for people to shut the fuck up. Neither of them are the first, and they won't be the last artists to take difficult times in their life and use it to propel their artistry, to propel their storytelling forward. And I'm not really sure where it got lost in translation that was allowed, especially considering if both are doing it, I don't think that anyone is an assailant. I don't think anyone is an aggressor or a defendant. I think it's literally them putting their feelings into their music, and it doesn't take long at all to listen to either of them and see that's literally what they have been doing their entire fucking careers. Oliver Tree has put a caricature of himself out there that he has talked about on numerous occasions. Listen to the interview he he did with Anthony Padilla, listen to the interview he did with Anthony Fantano, listen to any of his interviews, and he goes over it numerous times about how he puts his insecurities, his flaws into music as a way to cope with his depression, with his anxiety. He's a very mentally troubled person, and even if he is very goofy and zany and out there, he is putting his shit out there in a very emotional way. And the same goes for Melanie Martinez. She has been very vocal about her struggles with mental health and putting her shit out there into her music in an emotional way, and him doing the same should never be grounds to attack them or attack what they are trying to do just because you think that it is some personal attack against the other person, when in reality, even if it is directed at them and it's just something they are not comfortable sharing or talking about, that is no one's business to try to make these little vague accusations towards one or another, because if they are putting that in their music, they probably have a fucking reason. It is their own private business, and if they're struggling with it so much so that these two emotionally driven artists are putting it in their music as a storytelling element, they are probably struggling with it. And the last thing they need is their fan bases butting heads with each other. It's this weird parasocial relationship type of thing with the artists that people enjoy, but it is what it is. With that being said, my overarching opinions of Melanie is I think she's a very misunderstood and misrepresented artist on numerous fronts, and I think a lot of the people that heavily criticize her or walk into her music looking for it to be flawed or looking for it to be horrible or to make fun of it or shit down the throat of, I think are approaching it in a very weird way and not really paying homage to what she is doing, what she's embodying, or looking at the positives. And even if it's not your cup of tea or not really up your alley, which a lot of her music isn't, I adore a lot of her music, I like a lot of her music, I dislike a lot of her music. It's kind of in the middle, it's sort of in a gray area, and I think that's perfectly fine. I think you have to be able to respect a lot of the things that she has platformed, that she has spoken about, that she has put out there in a way that very few artists at her level have been willing to do, or not even willing to do, but portray it in such a blunt way and put it out there for so many people to see. And I think the dedication and the resonation of her fan base shows what she has been capable of doing with her artistry. And regardless of how you feel about her music, I think you can at least respect that. And while I do think that she can play it a little safe sometimes, or a lot of times, especially on her earlier material, I do think that her strongest moments are when she is willing to experiment and sort of break the natural conventions and boundaries of what you expect from the type of fields that she plays in. And putting these vulnerable things out there, I think, is a very impressive and respectable thing, even if sometimes she doesn't stick the landing and if she kind of contradicts herself with her production tactics and the way that she produces her music. I sometimes wish it would feel a little bit more natural and a little bit more organic and fluid, because I think with certain topics like this, I think when she opts for more minimalistic and scant compositions to sort of bridge the gap between her music, I think it makes for, funnily enough, some of the most powerfully driven music that she is able to produce. But what are your guys' opinions of Melanie Martinez? You can let me know down in the comment section below. I can't wait to hear it. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is. My name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying farewell.